Welcome to Leadership Moments.
In every great leader's life, there are pivotal moments that shape their character, test their resilience, and awaken their vision.
Together, we'll uncover the invaluable lessons hidden within these transformative moments. Today, our guest is Farai Musa. Raised in Zimbabwe, Farai relocated to the UK, where he completed his secondary and post-secondary education and went on to begin his sales career. Now a proud Australian, calling Sydney his home, his career journey has seen him transition from sales rep to sales leader, with hands-on experience building and managing international B2B sales teams in the UK, North America, Southeast Asia, and Australia, and industry expertise which includes tech, education, and digital media. He is the founder of Pyth Sales and currently works with CEOs to help them build a sustainable sales engine at the core of their growth. Today, we're going to talk about what it's like becoming a new leader and how to adjust and sometimes even rip up your own playbook when you're learning from your own team. Let's jump in.
Farai, I am so excited to have you here today. We've had some great conversations, and I'm excited for our listeners to hear things about that. So let's start off with when you first became a leader. You have some great story about the things that you learned. Would you love to tell our listeners about it?
Yeah, absolutely. And first of all, really appreciate the invite onto this episode, and really looking forward to the conversation. I think we've talked a lot about leadership, and one of the when I think about moments that have shaped certainly my philosophy or the kind of leader that I am today, really one of the first things that came to me was when I first became a sales manager. And it's an interesting one, because when when I got into that role, I kind of catapulted into a role which wasn't one that I particularly wanted at the time. I wasn't someone who was chasing a title for the sake of it. To be honest, I didn't think I was ready, and I didn't think that I fitted really the mold of the kind of person I thought a sales manager needed to be. Certainly in the environment that I was in. I was in a startup business. A business that had been through, in relatively quick succession, 2 sales leaders. And, I think when I kind of looked at that, I just thought, actually, that's just not really something that I want. Even though I always had an idea, I always had ideas about how I could certainly do the job, but I just thought I wasn't ready. And so when it came to it, because that's the situation I was called into, I think what I looked at was, I kind of looked at leaders who I'd had previously, and certainly, my predecessors, and I'd observed really 2 things that I thought they didn't do particularly well. The first of those was to their ability to actually manage up effectively, and which is particularly important where you're kind of reporting directly into the founder or CEO in a small business. And the second just kind of revolves around being able to protect your team, or kind of shield people from things that actually maybe get in the way of them being able to do their jobs, effectively. So, for want of a better way of putting it, being a buffer to give them space to do their job. And so, and I always knew, I think kind of instinctively and from, just other experiences outside of the kind of work and sales environment, I always knew that, look, what I needed to do was to be fair and to be consistent. And, I was always naturally inclined to being wedded, I think, to a process that I knew worked. But I don't think it was until years later that I realized that I was really only a good manager to a certain kind of individual. So someone who was like me, the kind of person who would either just do as they're directed or simply follow the example of what they saw in front of them being successful. So, what I was doing was leading from the front. Who doesn't want that kind of manager? And look, it's something, by the way, that you need to be able to do, particularly in a dynamic startup environment, being that hands-on player coach. Other issue is that I think I was doing lots of things well, lots of tactical things well, but it was largely reactive. So, I was looking at, what's the biggest problem which needs attention right now? Who needs help right now? What's the next deal that we need to close? Again, important things, but there wasn't much strategic, step back, think about, better ways to do things, whether it's now or in the future. And look, I think I've since learned that there's a very big difference between being a manager and having a title that says you're the person who's in charge, and actually being truly a leader, who people kind of look at and want to choose to follow.
Yeah, I love that. And I want to dig into a couple things there. So first of all, manager versus leader, absolutely two different things, right? You can be a manager by title, but a leader, you don't need the title. And you might have the title, but you don't necessarily need the title. And that's where people will follow you. They'll do whatever with you. And I love how you talk about lead from the front. And sometimes that is appropriate. And sometimes it doesn't work as well when you're doing it. And I agree with you. When you have a leader that is willing to stand up, get their hands dirty, do the things that they want to do, you really love that and you want to be with it. But then there's times that can hinder that person and their development when you are leading from the front and knowing when to do it, when not to do it. So really great points there that I like that you appreciate that you brought up. And you brought up in the beginning, okay, so I became a leader. I didn't think I was ready for it. Wasn't even sure I wanted it. Very, very common for people when they get promoted or first time into leadership, or even if they're becoming a leader of leaders. And so I want to ask you, when you were told or offered this position and you said yes, what did you do to help yourself understand how to become that leader? Did you emulate other leaders? Did you do other training? How did you start getting comfortable with yourself as a leader?
So first of all, when I was asked, I tried to say no. I tried to say no. Eventually, I kind of reluctantly accepted, which I've since found is a theme in my life, but let's not digress into that. So look, I think for me, the first thing I kind of went to is I've got I've always been really fortunate to have good mentors around me who I can kind of go to, who I can be vulnerable and honest with, and who can give me good direction. And I've always had a growth mindset. Even if sometimes the kind of the inclination was towards a risk aversion, and I think it's something that as I've gotten more experienced and been in positions more, that's become less of a thing. But then I think a lot of the what was kind of formative for me is I count myself really fortunate in terms of my grounding, certainly in sales and leadership, just in terms of the examples I had around me, right? Good and bad. So, I started my sales career in 2008 during the global financial crisis in the UK. So, as tough an environment as you can,
probably the toughest
start, right? And I don't think I necessarily realized quite how tough that was at the time, right? And I was again fortunate to be in very sales-centric, sales-led organizations where you had so many incredibly talented, incredibly capable, high performers, all around. And it's one of the reasons why I'm always and will always be an advocate and a champion of particularly for early stage salespeople, kind of being in an office surrounded by other people doing that job and that opportunity to kind of learn almost by osmosis because you're immersed in that environment, outside of allocated training sessions and development things that you can kind of go and do online. Actually just being in that environment just teaches you so much and just accelerates your career in ways that it's hard to quantify. But kind of going back to the point, what that meant is I had a lot of different examples of people who either were my kind of direct managers or who I saw leading others. And I think one thing that particularly stuck with me, I talk about this idea of kind of being that buffer for my team. I had one manager who I think the mantra was almost like if he was having a bad day, the entire team felt it, and to the point that, and this is to paraphrase slightly because we're on a family friendly podcast. The thing he used to say is crap rolls downhill. Just to say that, look, if I'm kind of getting heat from above me, then that I'm going to be transferring that. And I just thought, again, it was something that always kind of stuck, and I was like, well, I know that's exactly the opposite of kind of what I want to be doing. Just kind of instinctively, but also just kind of seeing what the result of that was on the team and kind of people around me. And like I said, I think I was always the kind of personality who was able to maybe kind of look past that and continue to do my job. But there were lots of other people where actually they could have had a very different outcome in where they ended up. But that didn't help them. And then you kind of saw them kind of go and be successful elsewhere, under different leaders. And I thought that was quite telling.
Yeah, I love that. And I love that you don't just learn from the great leaders, you learn from the not so great leaders of what not to do. And I always tell people that if you're in a situation that you have a leader that maybe is not so great, you can learn from them too, and you can leverage that later in your career and what you should and shouldn't do. So I really appreciate you sharing that story. And
just on that point, and it's one of those things where, look, I think, and you see it particularly in sales, where people get promoted into a position, maybe for lack of pathways within the business or whatever else. And so you're talking about people who incredibly talented, incredibly capable, high achieving individuals at sales and selling, closing deals, the kind of people you could listen to all day and kind of learn from all day doing that more kind of individual job. But then I think sometimes they mistakenly get put in positions where really, people are in their charge and they don't necessarily, they're not necessarily equipped for that. Sometimes then the kind of training and development pathways aren't there to try to help them get there. Or they are, it's just actually not really they're just the wrong person for that role, and that either goes unnoticed for too long, or you get some businesses where that's just not really a priority.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because I actually was going to go there too. And, leading sales is very objective, right? It's very like, what is your performance? Are you hitting your metrics? We're leading a lot of other like back office teams and stuff like that within an organization is very subjective. And so it's a very different type of leadership. And I agree with you that there are many leaders or individuals that you're performing well in your role. Therefore, you're, promoted up into a leadership position, but maybe not taught the human side of leadership and how to be empathetic and how to use that subjective matter as well, especially if I'm going to say, grown up on the objective sales side. It's very unique. And so I think that's really good. And I know that's something that you're doing today is helping these sales leaders with how to bring those two together to be a more effective leader. And I know that when you and I talked, you had some great analogies, I'm going to say, and really talked about how being in sports helped you in being a better leader. So I'd love for you to share that a little bit with our listeners.
Yeah. Good question. I think we talked about this, and to be honest, anyone who knows me knows that I often kind of pivot, on to, sports analogies. Look, partly it's because my, growing up, the thing that I enjoyed more than anything else was sport. Pretty much any sport. Put me in an environment where it's there's kind of competition, and I can kind of push myself and whatever, and that's my natural habitat. And I think that's why, certainly going into sales, I think that's why it was a good fit for me early on. And I always thought it was because of just the kind of competitive, element, and the fact that was, something that was encouraged in sales. And I think as I then kind of got more into it, I then started to realize that things like the psychology, that goes into, elite level sport is similar to what kind of goes into, the sales process. And when you think about things like, discipline and resilience. But when it comes to, leadership and team building, that was something that I also kind of learned as I went, was, very similar. The way that you go about building and kind of, managing a high performing, football team. I mean, when I say football, I'm talking what you call soccer, round ball.
Yes, not American football.
Yeah, just for clarity. But it's the same as how you're going to do that, or a basketball team, and a lot of the time it comes down to. So when I think about how I define leadership, for me, a great leader needs to be able to marry together three things: vision, systems, and people. So from a vision perspective, so setting very clear, very attainable goals, and ensuring that everyone in the team understands those objectives and is aligned with that vision. I remember a few years ago, so again, going back to football, I'm a big Liverpool fan, and we've just gone through the best part of a decade with an incredibly inspirational leader who was managing the club. And I remember certainly from kind of early on going into trying to find any materials I could read from his biography, to listening to to interviews and any kind of talks that he gave, because that was something that he was always kind of very clear on. It is vision, and being able to then kind of communicate that, but certainly systems as well. Any successful team that you see in just about any sport you can see quite clearly the identity and the pattern of play, and really the kind of the system behind how they are trying to play. Regardless of, personnel who kind of come in and out of that, that identity holds true. We've just, if you're someone who follows football, we've just had the Euros, which Spain just won. So you've just seen a team who, in terms of ability on paper, not the best, most talented squad of players you're ever going to see, but in terms of a system and a structure in how they play, incredibly well drilled. Like I said, regardless of the personnel coming in, that's kind of allowed them to shine through. And you see so many examples of that. And sales leadership is exactly the same. So if you're going to be a good leader, it requires you to be able to create things. So systems and processes. Plan how you're going to make those things that you've created happen, and shape the processes accordingly. And then importantly, be able to communicate that. And then it's about constant repetition, repetition, to the point that you almost sound like a broken record. But I think if you don't have those kind of catchphrases and things that people will necessarily associate your leadership with, then you're probably missing a trick, in terms of those kind of foundational structures. And then the kind of third element to that is, as I said, people. And, when I talk about people, it's, do you have the right people? Are they happy? How do I make it so that people want to choose to follow me? I think I said that earlier. But how do I make it so that they trust me? Do they believe in my ability to make them better? And does my boss care about me, my growth, my career? And that makes all the difference. And when I kind of think about it in that way, it's only in my more kind of recent way that my more recent, days and years as a leader, that I think I sort of landed on that as a more of a kind of a philosophy that I was trying to lead by. But when I certainly thought about it, certainly from the people perspective, it's quite a confronting moment when I realized that what I thought was right, and look, like I said, being fair and being consistent is great. And I think everyone should, if you're leading anyone, doing that is important. But where did empathy feature in my toolkit? Like real empathy that was about understanding different individuals and different personalities and trying to bring the best out of them, which wasn't just about, okay, how can I get an outcome out of that person? So it being a quite a transactional thing. And so when I think about the people part of that equation to being a good leader, I believe the ultimate job really of a good leader, certainly a sales leader, is to be an enabler. So can I get out of your way enough, yet provide the platform from which you can grow and thrive? And that's just a really important, important thing that I always try to keep in mind.
Yeah, I love that. Vision, systems, and people. And when you think about can I get out of your own way? That's like, to me, using the sports, right? That's the coach along the sidelines encouraging you to run faster or pass the ball or, whatever it is. But they're letting you do it, right? They might be guiding you along the way. So I love that. And as we're talking about for our American listeners, we're talking about soccer or football for the non-American listeners.
Important distinction to make. And actually, even in Australia, which is which is where I live these days. But the thing I was just going to say there is, and actually kind of is similar, and I've learned this in more recent years because I've got two little girls, one who's 3.5, and my youngest daughter is going to be 1 next month. But it's exactly the same kind of principle in how, whether you're kind of trying to teach them to walk or whatever else, it's being able to kind of guide without necessarily being controlling, and try to kind of get out of their way and allow them to grow. Different because you're dealing with with adults and whatever else, but the principles are exactly the same in my experience.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's great. That's a great, I mean, you're right. And you're going to be doing that over and over again, whether it's crawling, walking, helping them with school, yes, teaching them their own sports, or whether they're playing a musical instrument, whatever that is, as they're growing up, you're going to be that type of individual as a parent. So yeah, I love that. I love that. Now, you were talking about getting out of their own way. And earlier you mentioned about, hey, like people that are like me, it's really easy to lead. But what do you do about those high potentials that are different than you? And how do you lead them? And I think you have a great story of how you had a realization about some individuals on your team that maybe weren't similar to you, and how you learned how to lead them better. So would you like to tell a little bit about that?
Yeah. Interesting one. Because again, when I think about, the kind of the most important things that have shaped certainly where I am today in my journey, in how I think about leadership and how I kind of look to lead others, it's often things and moments that you maybe don't recognize, and this particular story isn't a single moment, but I had a period a few years ago where I was essentially forced to confront the idea that I was, how do I put it? I think I was being directly responsible for stifling the creativity almost of a really high performing individual that I was supposed to be leading. I think I touched on earlier the idea that I think I've always been good with people who are like me and kind of similarly minded, those kind of drivers, and but if and so if you had ability and you were willing to follow a prescribed pathway, I could get the best out of you. I could get you selling. But suddenly I was in a situation where I was working to establish market fit on a new product. It was hard. It was challenging. I'm working with a team with undoubted potential and ability, but certainly limited in their belief in the new direction we were trying to drive with this new product. Partly because it was just new, very different for the business in terms of the motion. And for some of these people, they were individuals who were being pulled from something where they had their motion and their equation down and how they were selling, how they were hitting their numbers, and suddenly you're just pulling them into uncertainty. And it's people with varied levels of experience. Look, and it's the kind of thing that you're going to get often, particularly in businesses that are, moving fast and that are scaling and growing. But obviously that doesn't change, how they're feeling and kind of thinking about it in that moment. And then you add to that what sometimes ended up being I'll call it a personality clash with an individual who, to be honest, was my best player. And it's a clash that in hindsight, to be honest, actually was maybe less about the differences in our, personalities and, the people that we were. And it's something that, hindsight's a wonderful thing, was far more about a leadership style that, from my perspective, was actually quite limited and one-dimensional in many ways. So it actually ended up being in trying to unlock the business challenge of, again, new product needing to be launched, trying to generate revenue, and trying to make this thing successful, and generate momentum. That the momentum that we needed. That I realized that I had almost a complete blind spot when it came to adapting my own style and behaviors to different personalities that I was tasked with leading. So what ended up happening, Stacey, is I almost kind of tore up the rule book, and this is after a conversation with my mentor, and kind of going and reading different different things, and actually one of the I'm trying to remember the name of the Simon Sinek's Leaders Eat Last. Was an important, a bit of reading that I did. And, he talks about the importance of building trust and safety, and, the idea of that kind of servant leadership. And, so doing kind of things like that from a personal development, perspective meant that actually what I ended up doing is I went back, tore up the rule book, almost on how the business I was in at the time had gone about sales leadership. So again, a lot of it had been this idea of, if you're the top performing seller, then automatically the the pathway for you is you're then leading people, and how you end up kind of doing that, varying results. And often you end up with a business that's continuing to grow and thrive, not necessarily because of certain leadership styles, but almost in spite of, because actually you've got a good product, and you've got enough of a core of kind of good people, and so things happen, but actually at the heart of it. So anyway, it was kind of in thinking about that, and so shifted the focus, initially certainly not from just the tactical things, and we touched on this before, but to being more strategic. And I think actually even more importantly, for me personally, it was moving to a hyper focus on people and the relationships that I was able to build with those with those people, which wasn't just about the kind of transaction of the result I was trying to get out of them. And so genuinely trying to understand individuals. So what are their drivers, their goals, their motivators? An important thing if you're in sales, what is their why? That they kind of choose to live this life, which, there are easier ways to make a living than to be in kind of the high performing, sales environments. But, I think if you're, leading people in the right way, it can certainly be rewarding, and not just financially. And so, look, I reflected on things like, something as simple as the intention behind my messaging. I've always been someone who believes that, words matter, but I'm not sure I was always necessarily, deliberate as I should have been in the words that I was speaking, and thinking about not just what am I saying, but actually how might that be received by different individuals? Because I think they're two very different things. And the more you can kind of close that gap, then the more impact I think you're able then to, to make with with individuals. And funnily enough, look, all of a sudden we had momentum in that team. The team was flying collectively, individually winning, kicking goals, and it was a lot of fun, and a really kind of cool period in my certainly in my leadership journey.
All right, there's that sound. It's time for us to go to the fun questions. Are you ready for the fun questions?
I think as ready as I'll ever be.
All right. Okay, if you were an animal, what would you be and why?
Okay, this is easy. Although I should maybe say, someone who's grew up in Africa and Zimbabwe, I should probably say, something like a big five animal, like a lion or an elephant or something. But actually, for me, it's a camel. I think camels, for me, it's the resilience, so their ability to endure and succeed in tough conditions. They are so adaptable, so reliable. They're patient, but I also love the kind of calmness and their ability to just be able to navigate and guide through any kind of uncertainty. So yeah, if I wanted to be any animal, it would definitely be a camel.
I love that. I love that. All right. Next question. If you could instantly become an expert in something, what would it be?
So I love that one. So one of my favorite things is stand-up comedy. So I was actually at a stand-up comedy gig last Friday. And so, I love, if I could do something, it would be that. And not because of, the idea of being funny, which I'm not particularly funny, but it's more just that ability to be a compelling storyteller. Their timing is incredible. The use of language and language is something that I love. But I think it's also, to be honest, and something maybe kind of less sales and leadership related, just that ability to be able to surface and sometimes tackle not just topical things, but sometimes quite difficult subject matter, which I think is incredible. But to be honest, also just that ability to be able to think on your feet, especially for a lot of these guys who do the kind of observational stuff. I think it's an incredible art form. And yeah, definitely if there was something that I could just wake up tomorrow and be able to do, stand-up comedy.
Yeah, that'd be fun. And you're right, storytelling, like as a leader, it helps you to be able to tell stories. So I love the tie-in there for sure. And I think you'd be pretty funny, Farai. I faith in you.
Okay. Maybe to my 3.5-year-old. I'm not sure I've got too much more of a wider audience than that, but
your captive audience. Yes. Well, Farai, thank you so much. Really enjoyed the conversation today. I love the vision, systems, and the people. I love the idea of getting out of the way so you can let the rest of the team go and people that are different personalities. It might not be like you, so I love the way that you think about that. And if people were looking for you, where could they find you?
Thank you, Stacey. So yeah, to be honest, the easiest is probably LinkedIn. So I'm on LinkedIn, and they can also come to my website, which is pithsales.com. And yeah, they're really the places to find me. But look, really appreciate the opportunity to come on today, and enjoyed the conversation. It's a subject I always really enjoy talking about.
Great, thank you so much, Farai.
Thanks, Stacey.
And that concludes another episode of Leadership Moments. We hope you found inspiration and valuable insights in what we shared today. Remember, leadership is not defined solely by titles or positions, but by the choices we make and the moments that shape us.
Embrace the challenges that come your way, for they may be the very moments that propel you toward greatness. We'd love to hear your thoughts and stories as well. Connect with us on our website at leadershipmomentspodcast.com or through social media on Instagram at Tracy_Ann Palmer.
And Stacey Castor _. Remember, your leadership moment could be just around the corner, waiting for you to seize it. This is Stacey Castor, and what doesn't challenge you won't change you.
And this is Tracy Ann Palmer. And be the change you wish to see in the world.